All men have secrets, and here is mine, so let it be known. I like hollow cranks from the 90s. Little Morrissey for you. Who doesn't love Morrissey? Answer is a lot of people, actually, but he's one of my favorites. Anyway, welcome back. It's John, the Yellow Sheldon, aka some other racist name that I haven't thought of tonight because I'm tired. Anyway, I know you're here for these, but let's talk a little bit about how we got to this before we get started. Now, you may be wondering about the butterfly knife. Aside from being a prop about cutting, it's also got sort of a funny story behind it. So people can trade stuff in at our bike shop. They're allowed to trade in their old parts, and we give them store credit, and they're able to use that credit to buy new used bike parts. So this was at the bottom of a bin full of bike crap. It's nice because it's utterly dull, and I can do my best Angelina Jolie impersonation with it. But that's neither here nor there. Let's talk about hollowness and the hollowness of cranks. So traditionally, if you wanted to lighten up a crank, what you would do is you would modify your forging or do after-the-fact milling so that you had a big relieved section, a big hollow section in the middle, but it wasn't covered up. You know, you'd basically turn your crank arm into a big U-shaped forged piece. Now, there are advantages to this. Like, one, it makes the crank more stiff. Number two, it's quite a bit lighter when you remove this much material. It's not super fancy pants, and I think that you pretty much only find this type of crank on sort of entry-level stuff. I mean, this FSA Gossamer crank is not actually, you know, it's not exactly killing the game. Still, it's an effective and inexpensive for the manufacturer way to design a crank that's more or less hollow. Yeah, it's at least skinny, like me. So along the way, people have tried many different things to make hollow cranks. You know, notable examples would be Shimano Hollowtech 1, although I will say this, it's not very hollow. It's kind of hollow. You could fit like a crushed up sesame seed in there, but, you know, they were trying, and they were developing the technology which would eventually give us actual hollow cranks. Kill me. Kill me. Around that same time period, or perhaps a little bit before, the first really hollow crank that I remember seeing was from a company called Magic Motorcycle. Here's a broken one. Magic Motorcycle was a small company that had lots of like CNC stuff, and they would machine parts. And they made really, really fancy cranks of all different types. I've seen track, I've seen road, mountain bike, and these were wonderful. We are still using designs from the minds of the guys who ran this company. It would be Skooks and Alex Pong. I think it's a father and son duo, although it could be brothers, I'm not sure. For instance, they were the first outboard bottom brackets. They were the first hollow cranks, genuinely hollow cranks. The problem is how they were doing it was they were actually machining a clamshell. So there were two halves to each crank arm. You know, they had on the, let's call it the inside part of the crank arm, the one that's not cracked. At the very tip, where the threads would be, they would actually machine a little doodad. So it would be sort of volcanoed like this. So you can imagine sort of cup-shaped interface for the spindle interface. Flat, 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 flat. And then when it got to the end, it would have the threads machined into a little volcano like that. So then you come along and you affix the top part of the clamshell, which encases everything and makes it a crank arm. They were sort of like keyed, so up at the top here, and actually both sections here and here, and also on the sides at several intervals, the two clamshell halves were stuck together like this. And I think they were just epoxied. I think they had a really nice tight fit, and they were just sort of epoxied together. But we have separation here. We also have another photo of massive separation at the, like it looks like the pedal thread section just blew completely out. and you can see the little fingers that were machined together like this, or glued together like that. We also have had attempts at carbon fiber hollow cranks. These are my terrible drawings. So often what you'll start out with on those is sort of a dog bone shape of aluminum. So let's say this whole thing starts off as a forged aluminum alloy piece, sort of dog bone shaped, and in one end you have forged in your, in this case, square taper, and on the other hand you have your pedal threads sort of tapped into it. And on the sort of heavier ones, all of this will be carbon fiber. So it'll be solid carbon all the way through. On some of the hollow ones, you will have the same sort of dog bone, but they will have used a bladder, which they pump up with air while they're curing it, and they will hollow out this entire area and then pop the balloon, basically, leaving a hollow chamber with a bunch of, beetle skins stuck to the sidewall. There are other carbon cranks which don't have this connecting rod in the center. They're basically like an insert here for the pedals, an insert here for the crank bottom bracket interface, and then sometimes this is hollow carbon and sometimes it's solid carbon. But on these, a lot of times you see the pedal inserts get loose, like they'll break free and then jiggle around. Really hard to repair. Usually they're not safe anymore, and they're to be thrown in the trash. Moving along, Shimano spent a lot of money and time developing hollow aluminum cranks. They seem to trust aluminum way more than they trust carbon fiber. So, in the late 90s, early 2000s, when a lot of companies were moving towards hollow and solid carbon fiber cranks, Shimano pretty much drew a line in the sand and said, we're not making carbon cranks. I think they did make one carbon crank, or maybe that was a prototype, but to this day, if you're buying high-end Shimano stuff, you're getting an aluminum crank. Yeah, I mean, even Campagnolo had square taper carbon fiber cranks. I really like the development path these took. The first ones, as I said before, not too hollow. And through the years, they figured out new methodologies and new manufacturing processes which got them an actually hollow crank. So this example, which is an Ultegra, it's not the newest Ultegra, it's like 1 or 2 generations old, but it is goddamned hollow. It's really, really empty in there. And you can tell they're quite light. They're very, very light for an all-aluminum crank. So this particular one, I think, was hydroformed. So what they would do is basically make an initial forging of the aluminum, or maybe they're using just plain aluminum cutout. And there's a sticker that normally, I removed it already, but there's a little like inspected by sticker which sits there. If you remove that, you see a little feature where they've plugged a hole. That hole leads directly inside the chamber. So what they've done, if you don't know how hydroforming works, you basically are able to make really weird complex shapes with metal by injecting the workpiece with high pressure oil or water or whatever they use. So you have like a mold on the outside or like a mandrel on the inside, and it can go nowhere once the hydraulic fluid is being injected, aside from into the mold in the exact shape you want. So yeah, bravo to Shimano. They have made an actually hollow aluminum crank. And then as far as the spider goes, you can see that the crank arm is hollow. It stops being hollow about here, but all of the material in the spider itself has been machined and milled away. Although, probably not machined. I would guess that it was forged this way. Yeah, really beautiful work. Some of the Hollowtech cranks are, let's see, they're probably a U-shaped forging that has a cap put on the top of the same material, which is then either glued or welded in place, and then the edges are cleaned up so you can't tell that there's a transition. So, in my opinion, the most beautiful, and if you read things on the internet, the most sketchy hollow crank ever made was the Caramba double barrel. Now, This is the stuff of dreams. Their logo appears to be some sort of sombrero with a tongue under it, or an ass. I don't know. But, you know, this to me is the sexiest crank ever made, and it's also, I think, very, very smart. If there were any failings with these, it probably was just due to quality control or user error. Possibly they were installed too tightly and not with a torque wrench. So, what have they done? They've taken a piece of billet, and, you know, it was probably a bar of aluminum that ran along like this. They've machined their square taper fitting here, their pedal threads here. You can see how it's not in line. These two holes are not in line. It's sort of L-shaped to get to there. They have drilled out the entire inside of the crank all the way to the very end, from here to here, and from here to here. So what you're left with is basically an I-beam cross-section hollow crank arm. And they just did it with CNC machines. That's quite the engineering imagination, in my opinion. I mean, I don't know. See, so here's the thing: is I'm not sure if this has been done in other industries. You'll find that a lot of stuff where you're like, "Holy shit, that's so novel! I can't believe they came up with that." A lot of times, what really happened was that they were like aerospace or like maritime engineering guys, and they saw a thing or how a thing was built and went, "Oh, we could totally build, you know, a crank arm or bottom bracket that same way." Still, I've never seen another thing that was built with this double hollowed out design. Really wild, really funky. My favorite color of anodization also, by the way. Yeah, lovely, lovely cranks. These will be up on eBay pretty soon. I'm not selling them, someone here is selling them on eBay. I think if you go to the Old School Bikers store on eBay, that's where our shop sells a lot of our stuff, and so yeah, you'll be able to purchase these very cranks. They don't have any damage. I kind of looked at them expecting to see some cracks somewhere, and that actually brings me into another point. I don't actually know if these are fragile or not. You know, the problem with the internet is really that we have all these people who, like, you can't tell the provenance of these cranks, so who knows if some gorilla-armed piece of garbage, like, over-torqued to their crank arms and blew them apart. You can't tell. You just don't know. So when you keep that in mind when you're reading, you know, "I'll never buy Shimano again, these things failed," or like, "Look, my Campy hubs failed." You don't know what the weight of the rider was. You don't know if that person installed it themselves without a torque wrench and just used too long of a tool. You don't know if they used it on a trainer and sweat into it and corrosion set in. You really don't know. So, you know, unless you see a pattern or a recall notice, I would say consider most things safe. You know, if a major company has manufactured it and you see one example on bike forums that's like from 2003 that shows that it broke, you know, or some young busybody's like, "Oh yeah, I heard those break, dude. Bro, I heard those break." Probably they don't break. You know, probably they'll break if you abuse them. So, Carambas. I wish I could afford to buy these from the shop, because I totally would, and I would put them on my old man dad commuter bike. That's it for tonight. I hope you fuckers are appreciative. I cut 2 pairs of cranks in half for you, for your edification. I also want to say, you know, if you like this video and you're new to the channel, I'm going to kill myself after saying these words, but, you know, like and subscribe and share my videos. I am an exhausted single dad, and I take the time to make these videos because I think they're interesting, and I think that, you know, they have some intrinsic value. A lot of this stuff you don't really see that many videos online about. So, yeah. Have a great night. Yellow Sheldon signing off.